Welcome back to Penguin Classics on Air. With us today is Harold Augenbraum, the translator of the Penguin Classics edition of Noli Me Tangere by José Rizal. Harold is executive director of the National Book Foundation, presenter of the National Book Awards. Besides the Noli, Harold has also translated Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca's Chronicle of the Narvaez Expedition for Penguin Classics. Viking will publish his edition of the collected poems of Marcel Proust, with translations by Richard Howard. Harold has published 6 books on Latino literature of the United States and is a co-editor of the Norton Anthology of U.S. Latino Literature. He has taught U.S. Latino literature at Amherst College and writes the sometime blog, Reading Ahead, The Future of Literary Reading. As a follow-up to his translation of Noli Me Tangere, Penguin Classics will publish his translation of Rizal's second novel, El Filibusterismo, in 2010. How did you come to translate Noli Me Tangere, and what source did you use?
Well, I actually became interested in Noli Me Tangere when I stumbled upon José Rizal in my reading of Latino literature in the early 1990s. And came across him in several works by Filipino and Filipino-American writers, so I became intrigued, looked him up, and read Noli Me Tangere. I also read El Filibusterismo, and in a biography of Rizal, was fascinated by both the man and the work, and the fact that he was virtually unknown among Filipinos and in the United States, and among non-Filipinos in particular. So that fascination, the combination of that fascination and the fascination with the fact that he wasn't very well known here, sort of brought me to it. When I read the book, I was particularly intrigued by the artistic approach that he took to writing the novel, which was have a basic approach to the story and then fill in with this extraordinary cornucopia of secondary characters that really makes the novel so rich.
What has been unique to your experience translating the Noli compared to translating other works?
I think one of the things about it is that Rizal himself didn't even have all the words that he needed, because the words for a lot of the flowers, fruits, vegetables, things like that were untranslatable. They didn't have their equivalents in the Spanish language of the time because they didn't exist in Spain. They only existed in the Philippines or in Southeast Asia and places in the tropics and the subtropics. So, that using Tagalog words and phrases, I think, was the most interesting part of it, and the fact that he, was writing a Spanish that was supposedly not his native language, but that it was a really, really good Spanish, even though he basically used it as a school language and he'd learned it elsewhere. He's also kind of a fascinating character because he was something of a polymath, and he did, at that point, even when he was writing that, he spoke 3 or 4 European languages with a fair degree of fluency, including German, French, and Spanish, of course, and I think, Italian as well, and learning English around that time as well.
What types of responses have you received from both the Filipino community and the literary community in general about your work?
The Filipino community has been very supportive. They reviews mostly, through the newspapers and then certainly through the blogs have been very, very generous, especially from someone who is an outsider to the community, who came to it more as a literary person than a person who would politically be interested in Rizal for his effect on the history of the Philippines. I think they've sort of taken what I've done, realizing that that's the approach I wanted to take. From the non-Filipino community, people are kind of interested because since Rizal has such a low profile, or almost no profile in the United States among non-Filipinos, they're kind of intrigued about how I would come across this person and what the heck was this guy doing, meaning me, what I was doing, how I found out about him, and since until they read the book, they really had no idea who he was. So they've been sort of mystified as much as anything else, and then pleasantly surprised once they read the book.
Can you tell us what you're working on now?
I'm doing a translation of El Filibusterismo, Rizal's second novel. I'm about 40% of the way through. I'm also doing some outside study on it. Benedict Anderson of Cornell wrote a very interesting book that centers on filibusterismo. Back in 2006, I think it was published by Verso Books, and I'm doing some background research on it as well because it's very different from the Noli, which is a more personal work, and the filibusterismo is a very political work.
And finally, in your opinion, what makes José Rizal's Noli Me Tangere a Penguin classic?
First, we should start out with saying that it's a very well done book. The idea, the way he creates the narrative and moves through the narrative, going back and forth through different voices and the offset voices of the secondary characters, is really quite interesting and very, very technically sophisticated for someone who published this book when he was, 25 and a half years old and who had been writing it when he was in his early 20s. So the technical sophistication is quite extraordinary for an early book. The second thing is that I think it really is something. It has been something that stood the test of time in the Philippines, in particular, in Spain, and to a certain extent in Latin America. It's really the American public that has known very little about José Rizal, and to bring it into the classics to show people this extraordinary work, really the work of a young genius that they didn't know about, I really think is one of the things that has made me happiest about being able to put it in the Penguin Classics, because it's of extraordinary quality and something that people really should read more and know more about.
Thanks for your time.
Great, thanks.
Thank you to Rowena Jiminez and Harold Augenbraum for joining us on today's program. Noli Me Tangere by José Rizal is available wherever books are sold and at www.penguin.com.
This program is brought to you by Penguin Books, publisher of The Shadow of the Wind. Called One Gorgeous Read by Stephen King, this Gothic novel remains a favorite of booksellers and readers alike. The Shadow of the Wind, now available with a new cover in paperback.